Welcome back to Bourbon Blades and Barbecue. The smoker build is complete. This is my first cooking episode, and I want to thank you for watching. Today, it's pork ribs, St. Louis style, so let's go. For the rub, we're starting with 1 part or 275 grams of kosher salt, 3 parts sugar. Now, my 3 parts are made up of 1 part or 210 grams of turbinado sugar, aka sugar in the raw, 1 part or 140 grams of brown sugar, loosely packed, 1 part or 230 grams of white sugar, 1/3 part or 45 grams onion powder, 1/3 part or 40 grams paprika, 1/3 part or 45 grams of garlic powder, and finally a dash or 2 of rub sage. Now, this part is optional, but I enjoy the savoriness it brings to pork. Cover your mixing container tightly and give it a few shakes, paying particular attention to make sure that there are no large clumps of brown sugar remaining. If there are, just break them up with your fingers. Now on to the ribs. We're using a 2-pack of whole spare ribs, and we'll be trimming these St. Louis style, which means separating the rib boned area from the cartilage-filled rib tip area. First, flip the ribs meat side down to remove the flap of meat here called the skirt. Now we'll save this to cook separately as a snack. Next, we'll find the side of the ribs that have the thickest bone and feel for the top of the bone where it meets the cartilage and cut a line as straight as possible down the length of the ribs in order to create a rectangular shape. The last piece I trim off here is the smallest bone in the rack. Now, spare ribs typically have between 10 and 13 bones. The last one in the rack typically falls off during the cook, so I just remove it altogether. And again, I'm reserving this for a snack during the cook. Back to the meat side, we're removing some excess fat before our last step, which is to remove the membrane from the back of the ribs. Lots of debate as to whether you should keep this on during your cook, but my way is to remove it. Use a butter knife between the membrane and the bone and work it through until you reach the top of the rack. Then twist that knife continually toward the end of the rack until you have enough membrane released to grab onto it with a paper towel and remove the entire membrane away. Pretty easy, right? Now it's time to season these ribs. We're starting with a mustard slather. Run a line of mustard on each side of the ribs and evenly spread it over the meat, not leaving any large clumps behind. The mustard acts as a binder between the ribs and the rub. Some people like to use oil. I prefer the mustard method. Transfer your newly mixed rub into a shaker container and evenly apply it down the length of the ribs. After each application, gently press the rub into the meat, but don't smear it. Flip the ribs over and repeat the process on the meat side. And now it's time to put these babies on the smoker. Hey, remember that smoker I just finished building in episode 12? Well, here it is, preheated to 250 degrees using seasoned sticks of white oak. I intend to smoke these between 240 and 260 degrees for about 3 to 3.5 hours before wrapping them. After the first 2 hours, I spritz them with apple cider vinegar. At hour number 3, I do it again, and at about 3.5 hours, I pull these to wrap. Now, the color and the bark on these look really nice. The ribs are springy, which means they need a little more time to get tender, to the point that you can easily bite through the meat. We spritz the foil with vinegar and lay the ribs meat side down before double wrapping the ribs. I choose to double wrap with heavy-duty foil because of moments like this where one of the bones could break through the foil. It's important to keep a tight wrap around these ribs to make sure that the ribs actually braise instead of steaming inside the foil. Return the ribs to the smoker meat side down for another 1.5 to 2 hours before pulling them, allowing them to rest for 30 minutes or more. Unwrap the ribs, flip them onto a cutting board with all the rendered juices from the foil. I usually go after the 3rd or 4th bone in the rack because if the rack isn't completely tender, End to end, this bone will tell me. But today, we don't have that problem. This bite is super tender and not overcooked. I got a clean bite through, leaving the bite marks, not pulling the rest of the meat away. I'm very happy with these. Now let's just slide this back together so the wife will never know. While I'm celebrating this rack, I remember I still have another rack on the smoker, so let's go check on those. These ribs have been on another 15 to 20 minutes longer than the first, but I'm not really worried. The extra 20 minutes on made these even more tender, still not falling off the bone, which is how I like it. So I'm calling today a success, and with that comes a toast, as rib grease drips down the bottle. I want to thank you for watching my first cooking episode and my first voiced episode. The journey to build this smoker has been long and rewarding. Now, I've got my bourbon, I've got my barbecue. It's time for a happy dance. Well, I mean, it's kind of a dance.